Welcome back to All Things Creepy. I'm your host, Micah James, and this week I am talking about people who cheated death. Well, specifically, I'm talking about 9 people / groups of people. I'm not going to lie, this episode is going to be slightly on the shorter side, mostly because I plan on covering the people who cheated death iceberg. At some point, I'm thinking that one's going to come out in the next month or two. Since I'm so interested in this topic, I wanted to at least start covering it. I will be linking the iceberg that I'm talking about in the show notes. I can't remember the Reddit user who initially created it, so in case you guys want to look at it, you can see it on Reddit. But again, I'm going to go find that and post it in the show notes. Now, with all that being said, let's dive into the stories of the people who cheated death. First person we're talking about today is Isidro Mejia. I do apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Isidro was working on a roof one day in 2004 when he unfortunately fell off and he accidentally shot himself with his nail gun in his head. 6 3.5-inch nails made it into his neck and through his skull. However, they thankfully all missed his spinal cord and brainstem, so he was able to make a full recovery, albeit not until after several surgeries, but, after all those surgeries, he seemed to be fine afterwards. Richard Bliss is our next person. Bliss was a Canadian gangster who was targeted by the mafia several times in the 1960s. He ended up surviving 2 shootings, a fire, and 2 prison escapes. Given how many times Bliss escaped death and his apparent 9 lives, it seems, he was nicknamed the Cat. However, it seemed like the Cat's luck ran out in 1969 when he was shot 23 times by the police. Next is Shannon Malloy. In 2007, Shannon was in this terrible car accident that internally decapitated her, which basically just means that her spine was separated from her skull. And on top of that, all of her connecting ligaments and tendons were also cut loose. But by some miracle, by just like this miraculous thing, the doctors were able to fuse her skull and spine together while also being able to repair any other broken bones. Shannon was able to make a full recovery and graduated college with honors. This is another one where, if I can find the exact source where I read this, she seemed to be fine upon that update that I read. Again, if I can find that source, again, I will definitely be linking it in the show notes. Number 4 is Anne Hodges. Anne Hodges was napping in 1954 on her couch when a grapefruit-sized meteorite crashed through her roof and hit her. Her arm and hip were very badly bruised, but she was fortunate enough to still be able to walk. She did end up having to go to the hospital to make sure she didn't have any other serious injuries. Anne is just very lucky on multiple accounts. Not only did she cheat death, but she's also the only confirmed person to be hit by a meteorite in history. And she was able to keep the meteorite after a legal battle with the Air Force. She later on did donate this space rock to a museum. Number 5 on my list might be one of the most famous cases, if not the most famous case, of someone surviving / cheating death. And that is the man Phineas Gage. Again, like I said, this man might be the most well-known, or at least one of the most well-known people on this list. At the very least, he is usually the one who pops up the most when you look into this subject as a whole. Phineas was a rail worker in 1848. He was packing gunpowder into a hole when the gunpowder had somehow ignited and sent a large rod into his head. This rod entered his left cheek and came out to the top of his skull. He was able to make a recovery, but his personality very, very drastically changed. Phineas became a lot more aggressive and very rude, according to his friends and family. I know that his skull is on display in a museum somewhere, or at least I'm pretty sure it's on display. I'll at least be posting a picture of Phineas Gage on my Instagram, so you can at least get an idea of what he looked like post impaling, essentially. Number 6 is John Bienvenu. At the age of 28, John had found out that he had this lemon-sized mass on his brain. Now, this is scary enough whether or not it's cancerous or benign or anything else. So, like I said, that in and of itself is fucking scary. After some tests, it was determined that John had stage 4 glioblastoma brain cancer. This type of cancer, especially at stage 4, has a 95% mortality rate / 5% survival rate, depending on how positively you want to spin it. That being said, this young man was able to beat the odds and became one of the lucky 5% of survivors to beat this type of cancer. I couldn't find the year that this happened, but I think it happened like a little more, definitely a lot more recently than Phineas Gage's story. So since he beat it, I hope that if John is still alive, he's living his life to the fullest, and basically he survives a very deadly cancer. So that's actually legitimately great for him. Our next person I'm talking about is Vesna Volovic. Although not by choice, Vesna does hold the Guinness World Record for the highest fall without a parachute and surviving. On January 26th, 1972, she was in a plane flying to a different location, of course. The plane unfortunately ended up exploding mid-flight. This explosion killed everybody on board except for her. Vesna fell 33,333 feet, that's about 6 miles, from the air. Our next death survivors, I could do a whole entire episode on this one alone, and that is the Andes plane crash survivors. The rugby team for Uruguay was flying over the Andes in 1972 when their plane crashed. While 12 people did die, the survivors braced for a very long and very cold winter. They were stuck in minus 30 degrees Celsius weather on top of having a low food supply. When food did run out, they ended up resorting to eating their dead teammates. After 72 days in the snow, 2 of the survivors decided to go for help, which ultimately led to 16 people surviving the crash and the intense winter. But again, that's the Andes crash survivors is something that I can do a whole entire episode on, because there's just like so much more to it than that. That was like very intensely the Spark Notes version of that situation. And lastly, we are talking about Roy Sullivan. Between the years 1942 and 1977, Roy survived lightning strikes on 7 different occasions. The thing that's wild about this one is there are definitely stories of people who have gotten struck by lightning and survived. So, I mean, that in and of itself is impressive, but the fact that he survived it 7 different times is the most wild part of this. And kind of like the cherry on top of this impressive story is that his most serious injury was an injury to his ankle and some chest burns. I couldn't necessarily find what specifically his injury was to his ankle, but if those are his only big injuries, he pretty much walked away from those. So yeah, those were 9 different people who cheated death or narrowly escaped it, all that. If you want me to do a deeper dive into any of these people, or if you want me to do the iceberg sooner rather than later, let me know. Again, I will be posting the iceberg that I do plan on doing in the next month or two in the show notes in case you guys want me to do that sooner. So anyways, I will see you guys next week with the way things are going, most likely with another creepypasta, potentially with a movie review. We'll see what my lazy week next week turns out to be. Stay creepy, everyone, and stay safe.